Hello and welcome to another session in social psychology. Today we are going to look at attitude change, right? We often hear people say, you know, we have to change our attitude. We have to change the way we make our society dirty. We have to change the way we go to work late, particularly, for instance, in Ghana, we talk of the Ghanaian time. We have to change our attitude towards time. And it's important that we study attitude change because the world we live in is not static. As society changes, the expectation is that we also need to change alongside. You yourself as a human being are not, you grow. And the things you used to do as a child, you no longer do. And the things you currently do, you may not do 10 or 20 years from now. So in other words, what I'm saying is that change is a constant, right? So how do we change an attitude, positive or negative? So in this session, we are going to look at one of the strategies that we use to change attitudes. And here our focus will be on how we change other people's attitudes, how we get others to change their attitudes. So basically, we are going to look at the strategy of persuasion. So what is persuasion? What is the process of persuasion like? What techniques do we use to persuade others to change their attitudes? And is it always that persuasion works? When does persuasion fail? How do people resist persuasion? This is what this session seeks to look at. You would have to read chapter 5 of the required text to make meaning of the discussion here. So to start off, as is our practice, we want to define the concept of persuasion. What is persuasion? We say persuasion is a process. It is not an event. It's a process of changing attitudes through the presentation of various types of information. So what this means is that you are providing somebody with information at different times and providing different kinds of information through different means just to get them to change their attitude, right? So I've mentioned three things here. Different information presented through different means, presented at different periods, just to get a person to change one attitude to another. So what does the process involve, the persuasion process? We said that attitude change follows a series of stages, and each of the stages is dependent on the other. But before we consider this, the four basic questions you need to ask when it comes to persuasion is who, the who factor. Who is saying what? The what factor. Who is saying it? What is being said? To whom is it being said? And to what effect the outcome? So from these, we are saying that in order to be able to persuade somebody to change an attitude, it's important to consider the communicator of the message. Who is saying it? The source of the information. What is being said? You are looking at the content of the information. How is it being said? The medium through which the information comes. And to whom is it being said? The target audience or the recipient of the information. These are critical questions in the persuasion process. So let's take each of them and discuss some of the things you need to consider if you are going to be able to persuade another to change his or her attitude. We said that communicator is important. Often when people want to tell you something and they want you to believe it to result in a change, they will tell you, oh, as for this information, it's from a very reliable source. It's from a very credible source. So when it comes to the communicator, we need to pay attention to two factors, credibility and believability. Is it a source that is credible? Is it a source that is believable? And credibility is measured by two factors, expertise. The person giving the information, is the person an expert on the subject? Is the person trustworthy? The person has no intention to deceive. The person is believable. So when you have these variables present, this is an expert on the matter, and this is a trustworthy person because from his track record, he or she has been truthful, then you can trust such a source for information that can result in attitude change. The only challenge with the communicator is what we sometimes have that is referred to as a sleeper effect. And the sleeper effect is when there is a delayed effect between a low credible source and when the attitude is required to be changed. For instance, an expert puts out information, and perhaps before it gets to the final source, it goes through other means, other persons who may have altered the information. So over time, people get the information but delink it from the source. And that may alter the attitude they have, the way they receive that kind of information. Then besides credibility, the communicator must also be attractive. Research evidence suggests that attractive communicators are able to persuade people to change their attitudes as compared to unattractive ones. And attractiveness is based on 3 factors: physical appearance, likability, and similarity to the audience, right? This is for no reason that many institutions or many businesses use attractive salespersons. So the person is coming to you from the bank to sell a bank loan. These are beautiful ladies, handsome gentlemen, smartly dressed, attractive, people to whom you would even want to have a conversation, right? The strategy is that these people would be able to assess you and give you the information that will persuade you to come do business with them. So physical appearance is important. Then we also talk of likability. The person is friendly. The person is able to manipulate nonverbal cues, smiles, sits upright, all the things that will make the person come across as likable. And again, in relation to the communicator must appear similar to the audience, right? So people of similar backgrounds, race, gender, from your same hometown, the way they look would be much more appealing to an audience than one that looks too different. So if, for instance, you are a politician and you are going to a very rural area to campaign, that is not the place to wear a 3-piece suit too, because the audience will see you as very different from them, and they see that you cannot identify with their situation. So if you are going to such a context as a politician, then you may need to dress down and appear like the people. Let them realize that I am just like you. I understand your plight. I understand your situation, and so you can give me the chance to lead you. So when it comes to the communicator, we are talking credibility, attractiveness, and similarity to the audience. Besides the communicator, persuasion also requires that you pay attention to the message. And the basic question here is what is being said, right? Not who is saying it. So when you strip the message of the communicator, what does the message communicate? There are certain ingredients that must be present to make a message persuasive. And some of these are using facts as against vivid images. Should you use either or both? You are looking at the use of fear and humor, one-sided arguments and two-sided arguments. The manner in which the arguments are presented and the number of times they are presented are all critical in making a message persuasive or not. So let's start with the medium, the channel of communication. But let me go back again to explain these few factors. Using facts or images. For instance, there is evidence as to the number of women who die, for instance, from breast cancer in a year. If I came to you to persuade you to go for a breast screening, and I tell you, for instance, that, oh, 1,000 women die a week from breast cancer, would that persuade you to go check out yourself? As compared to if I showed you an image of a person suffering from breast cancer. Statistics versus images, which is much more persuasive. Or if I want to encourage safe driving, often on our roads, when you are traveling out of town, you see small mini signboards that say 12 people died here, drive carefully. 79 people died here, drive carefully. These are things I've seen mostly on the Cape Coast Road and the roads to the Volta region. often in curves and bends. When you see these statistics, does it encourage you to drive much more carefully as compared to if you are shown pictures of accidents where people have perished? The evidence in the literature, when you read the chapter on this session, you would see that it's important to balance the two. Use facts as well as images to make your message persuasive. You can also use fear and humor, but it's important to here again strike a balance, because when you use too much fear, people may become immobilized and decide that there is nothing that we can do to engage in a positive behavior. Fear is effective if people believe that what you are communicating is probable. If people believe that the consequences are serious. And when people know that there are things they can do to engender the behavior that you may be advocating. But like I said, it's important to balance fear with humor, because sometimes too much fear makes people afraid. And it's said that one of the reasons why we had a challenge with our fight in the HIV menace was because there was initially too much exposition of fear, and people took an attitude of whatever would be, would be. But you can communicate a very serious situation by putting in some humor. It gets people to relax, to accept the message. And it's also suggested that the message should not only be one-sided, but two-sided. And two-sided messages are much more effective because you let people know that you are objective. I know that this is what you are used to doing, but I am proposing another method. So you acknowledge one side and propose another side. So two-sided arguments are much better. The order in which the arguments are presented, depending on who you are speaking to, you may have to give out the information in bits and pieces, depending on their age and all of that, to get them to grasp the message and bring about the desired attitude change. And it's said that messages must also be repeated. But can we have over-repetition, where you repeat a message too much and people are like, oh, we've heard it over and over, this one, we know it. To make it effective, repeat it, but vary it. Repeat it in a varied manner. So today you are sending out the message in word, tomorrow you are sending it out in music, the next day you are sending it out in drama, and the variations will not make people bored with the content in order to make the message effective. The channel through which the message comes is also important. So if I come to you trying to persuade you to buy a product, the way I talk will determine. If I come talking very smartly, fast talk, the evidence in the literature suggests that fast talkers are generally more persuasive than those who speak slowly. Because when you talk fast, it suggests confidence, it suggests that you know what it is that you are talking about, and then you can convince another to buy into the idea. But when you are talking slowly, the person is wondering whether you are yourself sure of what it is you are telling him or her, and so you cannot win them over to accept what it is that you are communicating. The style of your speech. We say that you can be persuasive when your speech is powerful. So a persuasive speech should not have hesitation forms. When you are talking and you are using hesitation forms, you know, it suggests that you are not sure. You should also avoid the use of disclaimers. Oh, you may not believe this. Oh, I'm not an expert, but then you are telling the person that I shouldn't believe what you are telling me to work with it. You should also be careful of qualifiers. Oh, kind of, sort of, I imagine, I guess. It doesn't make your speech powerful enough for it to be persuasive. Then tag questions. Do you think? What do you think? I think. Is it right? Pleading for agreement does not make a message persuasive. And that can undermine your ability to get another to change their attitude. The audience is also critical. Whether people will change or not depends on certain characteristics, some of which include the intelligence of the audience. If you are going to speak to school children or speak to university students, you don't use the same language you speak with university students to speak to basic school pupils. So you have to look at the intellectual ability of your audience to know what message to send out and how to send it. An audience that needs social approval. There are certain category of people who need to be endorsed and affirmed over and over. If you have such an audience, are such people easily persuaded? There is a mixed evidence on this in the literature. Some say that those with a low self-esteem may easily be persuaded. But the evidence, another side of the evidence, is that such persons think that you want to ridicule them and will not take anything you say. The size of the audience. Is it easy to persuade somebody when they are alone or when they are in the midst of a group? Here again, the evidence is mixed, depending on what it is that you want to achieve. Then we talk of the mood of the audience. Can you persuade somebody to do something for you when they are happy as compared to when they are sad? Here again, there is mixed evidence. Sometimes when you want something from your parents, the best time to get it is when they are in a happy mood, right? But sometimes it's also when they are in a sad mood, because then they want to do something to lighten up their own moods. So all of these are dependent, but in fact, they are some of the factors that will determine whether an audience will be persuaded or not. So basically what I'm saying is that as a person, as a social psychologist, seeking to persuade people to do one thing or the other, you must be conscious of these factors and manipulate them to your advantage if you can get them to change one attitude or the other. So basically, you can attempt this question where you discuss the use of fear in persuasive communication. How can you get people to change their attitude when you use the technique or the element of fear? Is it effective? And if it is, to what extent? To what extent would it backfire? What are the techniques we use in persuading people? There are two basic techniques, the foot in the door technique. With this technique, you make a small, reasonable request. And after the person agrees, you follow up with a larger request. The whole idea is if you start with a big request, the person will say no. So like the name, it's just a strategy to get one foot in the door, so the person hears your message before you drop the actual information or message you want. Then we also have the low ball technique. And this is similar to the first one, only that here it is in regard to the degree of the request you are making. So you start with a relatively reasonable deal. And after the person has got in, you present another deal that tends to be worse for the person. For instance, you may be selling a vehicle to me, and then you tell me the vehicle is only 10,000 cedis, for instance. And I said, oh, that's a very good deal. I'm interested. And then I give you the 10,000 and ask that you deliver the vehicle. Then after you take the money, you tell me, you know, the 10,000 was just for the vehicle. In order for me to take the vehicle from the port, you have to pay another 10,000 for freight charges. Then I'm like, if I knew this, I would not have committed, but I have come too far to withdraw. And after giving you the freight charges, tell me you need to buy about 500 cedis fuel for me to drive it. So ultimately, I'm paying 2 times more, a worse off deal than you started off with me. That's the low ball technique. But people use these strategies to get access to others they are seeking to persuade. Should we always accept messages directed at persuading us? No. Otherwise, then we become robots and zombies, influenced by every wind of doctrine. So sometimes it's important to resist messages targeted at persuading you. For instance, you may be a Christian. Somebody comes to tell you, give you a message trying to convert you to another religion. So for instance, a Muslim comes and tells you, this is rather the way to salvation. Then you change. And when the Muslim leaves, a Buddhist comes, then you change. Where do you belong? Blown by every wind of doctrine. So yes, it's important to change some attitudes, but sometimes it's also critical to resist attempts at persuasion. And how do we do this? Persuasion can be resisted through forewarning. And forewarning is where you receive prior information that somebody is coming to persuade you. So for instance, somebody comes to tell you, you know, there's a gentleman coming to see you today to ask you for a loan. Try and get your answer before he appears. So before the person comes, you also start giving reasons why it's not possible to give a loan. So he does not persuade you to give him a loan. So forewarning kind of provides you with an inoculation. You prepare your ammunition, your answers with which to buttress, to fight against the persuasive message. You can also engage in what is called selective avoidance, avoiding the sources of information that you do not hear. So for instance, you are listening to a radio station, somebody is saying something that you do not want to hear. What do? You change the channel, so you do not hear the message. There are certain people we avoid in life because perhaps they are going to talk about your weight, that you are putting on too much weight, for instance. You don't want to hear it, so you selectively avoid them. They are perhaps trying to convince you to marry, and you don't want to hear that, so selective avoidance. Avoiding those who are going to give you information that you do not want to hear because you do not want to change one attitude or the other. And it's important to sometimes selectively avoid people who are wanting to change you in ways that you do not want to. Then you can also engage in what is termed reactance. And this is where you see or perceive that people are trying to influence your freedom, to get you to do things against your will. So what happens is that instead of doing what they want, you do the exact opposite of what they are seeking for you to do. Reacting. For instance, you may be seeking to lose weight, and you decide to eat, say, a ball of kenke. And just as you eat, maybe somebody helping you to train comes to say, oh, how can you be eating a ball of kenke given your weight? What do? In reactance, you end up eating 2 or 3 to tell the person, I am in charge of myself and I'll do what I want. Sometimes we react that way to resist persuasive attempts that people have to get us to change our attitudes. So what have we sought to do in this session? We have explained the fact that attitudes change and in fact need to change as times change. And there are several processes. One of the ways to get people to change their attitudes is to use persuasion. Persuasion is getting several sources of information directed at somebody to get them to change. And in the process, you need to consider the communicator of the message itself, the means or the channel through which the message comes, and the target audience. And sometimes it's important to resist attempts at persuading us, because in life we are bombarded with several messages, and you have to pick some and leave some. What strategies would you use? You can use reactance, forewarning, and selective avoidance. In our subsequent sessions, we are going to see how you can change your own attitude without any influence from another or without any persuasive message from another person. Thank you.